Alright guys, so this is the long-awaited video for importing our art assets into the PuzzleBot project. So let's go ahead and go over the things that this video will be getting into. I'm going to sort of take this section by section so you guys can skip between areas that you need a little bit more guidance in. Some of these things you might be familiar with, so this is to help you guys out. To start us off, we're going to briefly again go over Unity Collaborate, saving a new scene instead of over the original scenes, organizing our project folders, and setting up Unity for working with UI. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about Unity Collaborate, how it operates, and what we use it for in good practice. So I'm going to switch around here, and here's our project. I went ahead and I pulled it from the server. This is on my Mac computer, so you can see whatever device you get on, you can access Unity Collaborate through your account. So every single one of you had to create a Unity account. Awesome. When you first open up Unity, you should be able to log into that account, and then you should see Collaborate up top here. So I'm on a different version. You might see some of these warnings if you're on different versions at home. Be sure that if you are working from home on a different laptop, that you match the version that we are currently working with in class. If you don't know what version that is, we are currently working in the most recent, which is 5.5. Okay, so be sure to get that version from Unity. If you have further questions about versions, let me know. Otherwise, try not to publish your changes to Collaborate if you're on a different version. This can corrupt some files or create some problems in the long run. So do not, if you're on a different version, you'll get a prompt here. Don't publish live and overwrite anything that we are currently working on. Just bring it to class, ask me to help you with it. Other than that, if you are on the same version and you don't see any issues, the proper protocol is to make changes while you're making changes, and Collaborate is turned on. If you don't see Collaborate on, you can click on your services and you can turn Collaborate on when you open up. And then when you make any changes, you should see this little blue arrow, which allows you to publish your changes and always provide a description of what you are changing. That's just good practice. If you load it up and you notice that it's green or if it's orange, that means there's information that you need to pull from the server to get updated details. So that's pretty much the gist of Collaborate. Let's go ahead and go through the first steps to working in Collaborate. That's super important. So if you are working with a particular scene, now I'm going to use Brittany's original scenes to reference what changes I want to make. I'm going to be making changes to the lesson select, which in Brittany's case is the student menu. So I'm going to open this scene up, make sure it's loaded up here, and you can check that by just looking at the name of the scene up at the top left. Now I'm going to actually use this scene as a template, and I'm going to do a file save scene as. I'm not going to save over this scene, I'm going to save scene as. So I went ahead and I went to save scene as, and I changed it, the name of it, to match my name. So I went ahead and named it Keegan Lesson Select, and I went ahead and did a save as. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to replace that file with this information. Perfect. And this is in a folder that I created for us during class. Now you're going to save any of your scenes. Sometimes when you save your scene as, it'll actually go into your assets folder. You want to drag and drop that scene into your scenes folder, into the AR450. So we should see all of our scenes loading up here nicely, which is really helpful and great for organization. So I want to make sure that you follow this protocol for creating folders. If you want to create a folder, you can go to Create, Folder, and then when you create that folder you can name it. So that is just basic scene management and folder organization within Unity to make things a bit more streamlined. So let's see what we have next in store. We know that we're going to be organizing our project folders. We've already done this. So let's set Unity up for working with UI. So the next step for setting Unity up, it's very simple. we want to be able to see the immediate impact that we have on our project in order to better test our art in the way that it's going to look in game. So one of the things that I do is I sort of change my windows around. We don't need our services anymore. We can actually close this tab. It's just taking up unnecessary space. We want to give as much space as possible to our scene view and our game view. So even the project console here can sort of be minimized. Our hierarchy can be moved over, and we want to drag this tab somewhere. I like to drag it here so I can see it while I work, which is very helpful because I'm going to be changing these buttons and things like that. So that's your basic setup for working with your own scene, for opening up Collaborate and making sure it's up to date and checking your versions, for setting up your Unity space to best work with UI changes and elements. Now you'll notice I've got some blurriness on my text, but let's not worry about that for right now. We can come back to that. So the next step in our video is to talk about building custom button sprites, importing this art into Unity, organizing our assets, and doing a sprite swap. So in the demo in class, I didn't have an opportunity to show you guys how to make your own artwork, import it into Unity, and use the Sprite Editor to edit your files. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go over that with you. What I went ahead and did is I used a program that I have on my computer, because I don't have Photoshop on here, called Sprite. And I use this to actually create buttons for the game. Now this is a very simple, these are really rudimentary, don't judge me on my button design, but what's really important here and something to take away is that I created the initial screen size, so 1024 by 768 as my, when I created a new file, okay? And I went ahead and allowed myself to use the grid. So when I went to my grid setup, and you want to do this when you're working in Illustrator or Photoshop, no matter what you're working, and you want to have some sort of grid system, and you want to make sure that this grid is organized in numbers that can be divided by 2. And that's really important for dealing with the screen space and having these images be scalable. So each of my little grid squares here are 16 by 16 pixels, so we can divide that by 2, of course. And so I made sure that whatever my size, rectangular or square button, that this would be a number that would equate to something that was divisible by 2. So you do 16, 16, 16, and you'll notice that the dimensions of this are divisible by 2, which works out perfectly for getting that over to Unity and having that look appropriately look not pixelated and things like that. And I didn't miss some information here, but I just quickly drafted these up. So that's something to keep in mind when you are making these art assets. Be sure also to incorporate any of your UI elements in one PNG. And again, yeah, I'm working in a PNG format, so that's what the file format that you guys want to work in is a PNG. And I just found it easy to work with the dimensions by creating a 1024 by 768. That just kind of gave me an idea of like what the screen space looks like. You can certainly make this document whatever size you like, but I use this to give me a sort of scale reference. And again, save all your different versions of your buttons. So I went ahead and I saved this as a PNG onto my computer. If you want to get this into Unity, it's very simple. You can drag and drop. That's perfectly fine. You can drag and drop your files. You can also, oops, I've lost my mouse. Let me get that back. So you can also do an assets, import new asset. And that's another way that you can get your PNG, your image files, into Unity. What you want to make sure is when you do import these assets, that they are not sitting inside of the assets folder. Instead, they should be moved into the sprites folder. So again, organization, super important. There's another folder inside of this folder, folders within folders, good time. And you want to make sure that this is inside of custom art. So I'm going to move this into custom art. Okay, we're going to go ahead and put these guys in there. Perfect. And now you'll see even more folders, which is great. Okay, organization, again, super important. I'm going to drag these into AR450. Okay, so now I know that these are the art assets that I want to play around with, that are new art assets. So the next step is, how do we use the Sprite Editor? Okay, we're talking about our Sprite Editor. So let's go back. Let me add here for a second. If we're building our own custom sprites and we're importing it, we're going to use the Sprite Editor. So let me add that, so you can refer to it back when you are looking at this demo. So we're going to use the Sprite Editor to deal with editing our custom button sprites. So here's my custom button sprite. This is what it originally looked like. This is what we're going to turn it into with the Sprite Editor. So I'm going to click on this file. There's a couple things that I'm going to do here. Oops, sorry. I'm going to make sure that I go to multiple mode for my sprite mode, because I'm going to turn this into multiple sprites and not just one. Pixels per unit, this is fine. Okay, if we see any blurriness or strange stretching or anything like that, we can play around with the pixels per unit, but this should be just fine. You can deal with point. If you have like pixel art that's sort of precise, you can do a point filter, but for now we're going to leave this information as it is and go right into the Sprite Editor and hit apply. So here's my Sprite Editor. As you can see, each of these elements have their own sort of slice and dimensions. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Slice, Automatic, since these are all in a grid system and they're laid out approximately pixels by pixels. So I'm going to slice these different PNGs into their own separate sprites and hit apply. So this is why we want to design our UI elements in 2x2 divisible units, as well as on a grid system, because this allows our Sprite Editor to do a lot of the work for us. So if you notice, when I go into my button, you'll notice it sliced each of these perfectly according to how I laid them out in the file itself. Now I missed a little bit of art on the left-hand side, you'll notice, but it did crop these accordingly, which works perfectly for what we're trying to do. So now our next step is to get our art into the actual scene. So we're dealing with buttons here. So in order to actually change a button, we're going to select a button in the scene. Okay, so you see in the inspector, this button has different properties. We're dealing with the image and the button script. So both of these are going to be the properties that we are interacting with to make our changes. The first step is to change the UI sprite, the original image. And you notice the names of my buttons are down here. So we have button, I'm going to type button in, so it's a little easier to find. So I have duplicates here, and you might have that. So my button demo 0, that's going to be my first initial image that's shown. You notice now it's a little green, it's looking a little strange. So that's our color tint. We're going to actually change that to Sprite Swap. And you're going to go ahead and make some changes based off the Sprite Swap. You'll see a highlighted sprite, a pressed sprite, and we're not dealing with disabled sprites, so that doesn't matter. Highlighted sprite, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to repeat this process and find which one I'd like for me to be my highlighted. So I kind of want my highlighted to be subtle, but not as precise or not as loud as that green. So we're going to get our next color here, and then we're going to test it. So I changed 3 of these so that when I'm hovered over this element, oh, I'm being silly. So there's my game mode here. I'm seeing that. So when I hover over this element, and you can see it live in the scene view, when I click it, something happens. Now this is going to load. All right, and then we'll hit off play. And that's how you begin to switch some of the visuals of the buttons. It's very simple. You can also play around if you don't want to have this sprite swap and you want to go back to the color tint, you want that effect instead, you can just simply change that in the different property drop down here. But for the sake of this demo, I wanted to show you that sprite swap. So for the next demo, we're going to be talking about how to get an image from our Google Drive, how to import that into Unity, and then how to go ahead and change our background image and deal with sorting layers. Okay, for section 3, we're going to talk about adding artwork to our shared Google space, and this will be what you guys will consistently be doing from this point forward, is adding finished artwork and assets that will be added into the game through our shared space on Google. We'll be talking about how to load this custom background into Unity, which we've gone over for past assets, so this should be pretty straightforward. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sorting layers and how they are used to organize information on our screen. So let's get started. We're going to talk a little bit about our shared Google space. So let me cycle through my screens here. You'll notice on Trello that there is an upload assets here card, and I will move this with every week. I will move it to the most recent or the current week. To access this Google Drive, you're going to click on this link, and you'll notice that there are already some art assets. Now this is another opportunity to be super organized, and so we have backgrounds, as we did from the demo, and this is where we can load some images for our background image. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to download this background image that was uploaded, and I'm going to do a new. Now you want to make sure when you are uploading imagery or any asset onto this drive that if it is unfinished or if it is a test image, there should be a separate folder for that. If it is a final draft, put that in its own folder. So again, you want to be as organized as possible. So I downloaded this. I'm going to do a file upload. We're going to go to downloads, and we're going to upload this into the drive. Now, since I already have this on my computer, I can certainly just go right into Unity and we can work with this background image. So let's go ahead and do that. But that is how you're going to use the Google Drive to organize your team's artwork and work with it. That way we have access to files no matter where we are. There's no possibility that someone might come to class, forget their flash drive, and then we don't have work to work with and import. So let's go back to Unity and talk about how we're going to get this work into Unity. It's pretty straightforward. You guys know this process. You're going to do an import new asset. I've already done that. You'll notice that I have the asset imported. When I did import it, it did put it into assets, and I dragged it into my sprites folder, into my custom art folder, into my AR450 folder, and there it is. Awesome. And you'll notice that in the properties, or inspector, I'm sorry, that it's a 2D and UI image, which is perfectly fine, and that's what we're going to be using for the majority of this project because it is a 2D project. So, how do we get this image into our space? Well, we could drag and drop it. That's one way to do it. And I'm actually going to rename this so it matches what it's used for. This is the background of the lesson select. So I'm just going to double click it, rename it, and there's my background of my lesson select. So you notice that this is not the size I need this to be. So I'm going to do a little zoom out. Okay, and I have T selected. You can also use your, you can also use your different controls here. And while holding down Shift, I'm going to sort of scale this. Okay, so we're going to have this image back here. Now this is a bit noisy. Of course, we're going to want to work with, this is a draft image, so this would be used for something different than what is finally decided. This would be used for making sort of a demo screen and sharing it with people. So there it's sized. If I want to see what this looks like in game, again, we have our game window down here. Now I notice that I don't have this image visible, and that's not really helpful. Again, you can sort of move this by using your W key for movement and grab the handles if you don't want to sort of click it and try to move it around with your little cursor. So let's figure out why we don't have this image here. And if we go here, we notice that we have to use sorting layers. We talked about this a little bit in class, but we're going to go over this again. You notice that in your inspector you have sorting layers, and this is on the default layer, and it's order 0 in the layer. Now we have different layers, and I'm actually going to show you how to arrange some of these elements in those layers. So we have, this should be in the background because it's a background element, and it should be furthest behind. So the way this works is that 0 is in the front, and then you sort of move through -1, it moves further back, and so forth. But the reason this isn't moving around the way we need it to is that none of these other elements are on a layer that is helpful to us. So we're going to have to be a little creative. So what I can do is I can put this back on a default, and because I moved it -1, it's behind everything on the default screen now. And this is sort of how Brittany had organized the sorting layers. And for now, that's perfectly fine. for now to not fuss with our own custom. This is just for the sake of getting these items viewable. If you want to go through the trouble and actually set these to sorting layers, I actually might go through the trouble and do that, and you might see some changes. But for now, as long as we understand that we put something on a layer, check these are all in the default layer, and when you start moving these number values around, you'll notice that the elements will start shifting themselves around. Now, see, we still don't see this image. And the reason for that is when we actually dragged it into our scene, it had its coordinates set to the exact position of the camera. So if we change this position around on the z-axis, you'll notice it's 0. And the camera also sits at 0. So if we were to change this to something like 1 and move it back, you'll notice that it'll actually be in front of the camera. That's because we're using a perspective camera, and that is not going to see the image if the image is on top of that. So we move it back in the Z space, and it allows for our image to be actually to be visible to our player. So that's how you're going to get the background image to actually display instead of that sort of blue background. You may not want a background image, you might just actually want the solid color. And if you want the solid color to be different, you can change the actual color through the camera options itself. So if you select the camera and you look at the inspector, maybe you want the background to be this sort of green, so we have like this subtle green. Let's try this guy. And if I don't want this background, I can click it off, so I can disable it, and you'll still, whoa, geez, that looks atrocious. So you can change the color around and try to get something that better fits your design. So that is one approach. We can take maybe like just a black, or whatever colors that you want to play around with, or maybe you do want a background image and you can re-enable that background image. It's kind of hard to see the green font. So that is just really how simple it is to get an image in there and play around with the sorting layers. Again, if we hit our little robot here, we have Dob. He's on a sorting layer, and we can organize him according to if he is in the default, where does he stand. He can be in front of these buttons as well as behind them, depending on where he is in his sorting layers, and you can play around with this. But that is the simple approach to getting our elements to be organized in our screen space effectively. And this concludes the few exercises that we did in class and a video. So just an overview. We went ahead and we set up Unity Collaborate. We saved a new scene with our name, and we put it inside of a folder for the AR450 changes. We had an opportunity to set up Unity for working with UI, so that means that we took that game menu and we put it where we could see it in addition to the scene. We also had an opportunity to build some custom buttons. We used our own custom art. We imported it and used the Sprite Editor to dissect it into multiple sprites that could be manipulated and used. All while doing this, we organized our assets and used Sprite Swap on the buttons to get our sprites to move between one and the other when we hover over when we click. For the third section, we just went through our Google Space, we loaded in a custom background, and we used our sorting layers to adjust that background. There was an additional thing that we did in this, in that we adjusted the Z coordinate to show our image. So that was another thing that we had an opportunity to do, because we were noticing that our image was not showing up in our camera's view through the perspective view. And that is the introduction to each of these processes for the following weeks that we will be doing production. This will be very helpful for you guys to start to get your artwork into the Unity project, to manipulate things, and to be able to save them on your own scenes so that we can finally merge everything together. I hope these were helpful. Please let me know if there are any other things that I may have missed, and feel free to contact me if you have questions. Good luck!